Okay, so I decided to do a presentation on the Titanic. The Titanic came up from two guys, Bruce Ismay and Lord Peary, and it's basically on three ships that they had in mind. They wanted to build three ships called Britannic, Olympic, and of course the Titanic. Construction first began March 31st, 1909, and it began in Belfast, Ireland. And according to National Geographic, the keel was built at Harland and Wolff Ship Building Yard. The structure was completed in April of 1910, and it took 1 year for the keel to be completed. And basically, the actual structure of the ship resembled a human body, where the inner parts of the ship resembled the ribs of the body, and everything else was held together by the outside of the keel. The hull was completed in October 1910, and it was steel plates riveted together. And according to National Geographic, it estimated 75% of the Titanic's rivets were fixed using hammers and sheer manpower. The Titanic was basically built into different parts. It was split long ways in half, and it was basically came together as one, and they riveted it all together, making it as complete one big ship. In May of 1911, the hull was put into deep water. It took about 62 seconds for it to get into water. And according to National Geographic, at this time, that's when the fitting out process began. And this basically meant what they started to do was, since they got the outside of the ship already made, they started to build on the inside of the ship now to try to get it ready for passengers to come on in April of 1912. In January 1912, the major mechanical components were put into the ship. And as you may know, the ship has 4 memorable funnels. Only 3 of them worked. The other one was used as like decoration because it just had no purpose of being on the ship except for decoration. Most of the fitting out process of the ship was completed by January 1912. This included putting the lifeboats on the Titanics, and the previous design included 64 lifeboats on the Titanic, but the White Star Line reduced the lifeboats on the ship just because they wanted to have more deck space for the passengers to walk around and have fun and play games and things of that sort. So with the final design, there were only 20 lifeboats. 14 of them were wooden, which held 65 passengers each. 2 of them were emergency boats, which held 40 passengers each. And 4 were collapsible boats, which held 47 passengers each. The boat capacity was about 1,178 people, and there were more than 2,200 passengers on Titanic. And according to National Geographic, the lifeboat capacity exceeded the Board of Trade safety requirements at the time. So at the time, it was okay to have less amount of lifeboats for the lives on board. And then in April 1912, the Titanic was completed. And then on April 10th, 1912, the fateful voyage took its journey. It left Southampton, England at 12 p.m. at noon. 12 p.m. From April 11th to April 13th, there were a lot of iceberg warnings, and Titanic actually received 6 warnings. The history website recorded that the 6th warning was ignored, and the captain wanted to maintain speed and wanted to stay in the newspaper, so he kept on going full on even though he got all these iceberg warnings, which a lot of them were ignored just because the messenger that was receiving the warnings were trying to get messages to and from loved ones who were on and off the ship. On April 14, 1912, at 11:40, the Titanic hit an iceberg. It created a series of leaks in the first 5 watertight compartments in the ship, but the Titanic was only able to handle 4. That's what it was built for. It was handling the first 4 compartments. So by 11:50, according to history website, the water rose to 5 meters, and it kept on just going from one compartment to the next to the next. And about 2 hours later, the Titanic broke apart on surface. So if this is the surface, it broke apart, and then it went up, and then it went down. And by 2:20, all of the Titanic was submerged underwater and was heading towards the ground of the Atlantic Ocean. Out of all this, only 710 souls survived, and 1,500 souls were lost. And out of all the lifeboats, only 1 came back to try to save as many people as they can. There are a lot of controversies saying who's at fault, whether it was the captain because he ignored all the iceberg warnings, or it could have been the iceberg because it hit the first 5 compartments. But another factor that people tend to forget is the rivets that were used in the Titanic. A lot of the rivets, they were cheap, they were made of weak metal, and because of this, the Titanic steel hull fell apart. And it couldn't keep the Titanic together or afloat for a longer period of time. And White Star Line, the people who own the Titanic, knew about the rivets, about them being weak and cheap and all that. But they were greedy because they wanted to get the Titanic out there because it was considered the most luxurious cruise liner of all of the day. And so they wanted to get the Titanic done on time, and they wanted to keep the Titanic in the spotlight. So instead of going, making sure everything was safe and using good rivets and everything, they were greedy and they used the cheap ones and the weak metal, and that's what caused the Titanic to sink. You may have learned a lot of new information during this video, but I hope that it brings some light to you, because a lot of people don't tend to know about the rivets, and that was something that I learned personally, and I hope that you will take that into consideration as well when thinking about the story of the Titanic.